Gentlemen, fourth speaker, an ex-RNZ Navy officer, navigation officer aboard the frigates Wellington and Southland, not simultaneously of course, sequentially, commanding officer of the fisheries vessel Harwater. He clearly decided to come ashore at one stage, in fact in 1995, where he, at which point he completed an LLB at Victoria University, worked in London for a while, returned to New Zealand in 2004, joined OMV in 2007, and is currently responsible for all commercial and legal matters relating to OMV's exploration and production activities in New Zealand. So would you please welcome the commercial and legal manager for OMV New Zealand, Patrick Teagle.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I was sitting here a couple of minutes ago hearing so much from my fellow panel members and just wondering what I was going to open with, and it occurred to me that being here from the oil industry is sort of like being Darth Vader in the middle of a room full of Princess Leias and Luke Skywalkers, and so I'm going to see how this goes. Some themes are clearly emerging. Look, essentially, we are in a very interesting time at the moment. The last couple of years of going through a plethora of legislative change in the EEZ, and as Rob and the other guys have alluded to, multiple agencies, multiple pieces of legislation, all coming together at a time when cyclically the commitments of a number of the operators under the permitting regime under the Crown Minerals Act has meant that you've got to meet those commitments and meet all these regulatory requirements, obtain all your corporate approvals for massive expenditure, and do all these things in a very, very short time frame. So I think one of the things to take away out of this is that actually it's going pretty well. I do say that in my concluding remarks. A lot of people expected this would all be quite difficult and all-consuming, and I guess it's been all-consuming. But I think overall, as the lead operator in New Zealand in terms of offshore activity, I've been heavily involved personally in the consultations and work with the EPA team, Maritime New Zealand, High Hazards Unit, and all these folk. And overall, the practices that we're getting into are pretty good. They are regulating and filling gaps in areas where we've already been pretty good in my view, but that's quite justified and expected. And I think things can only really get better and better. We've been pretty pivotally involved in things like the seismic marine mammal code, and I think that sort of thing bodes well. But one analogy, for example, is when you're sitting in the aircraft waiting to take off and the pilot's walking around looking at the aeroplane, he's not going to get in the aeroplane if he sees something wrong, right? Because he wants to get home to his wife and his family. And so for OMV, which is a global corporate exploration and production company, that is our mantra. Health and safety does come first. We want our guys, our people, to go offshore and come home and go back to their families just as they went. And if we're not confident about that, then that isn't, it is not going to happen. We're going to stop. And I'll talk about that during my presentation. But I think we're in a good space. There's more work to do. But I think the agencies are doing overall a great job. There's always issues along the way, but we work through them. So without any more ado, the picture there is about 3 weeks ago. That's it's been shown on the slide. That's the Kantan IV. It's on contract to OMV as the lead operator for the Maari joint venture and one other joint venture. It'll be drilling 3 wells for us, then going off to other operators. But it just arrived and it was offloaded. That picture you just saw was in Admiralty Bay about 3 weeks ago on board the Dockwise vessel. I think it's Mighty Servant 2. Which came down from Singapore. I was going to say a little bit about OMV, go through the drilling campaigns to tell you what's actually going on at the moment, talk about the preparation and how the legislative changes have impacted us, make some observations, and a couple of what I think are great pictures, but it depends on your view of what you think great activities are or not, I guess. So who's OMV? I got asked to put this in because no one's ever heard of us. OMV, and my German's appalling, but it's Österreich Mineralwirtschaft AG, which is the former Austrian state, not Australian, the Austrian state petroleum company, which was established in the 1960s when Austria found it had boundless gas in the Vienna Basin, and it still produces today and makes up a significant proportion of OMV Group's gas production. Established in New Zealand in 1999 with acquisition of assets in Australia and here. And actually by accident. The Austrians had no intention of coming to New Zealand, but acquired some assets on the back of going into Australia. And ironically, one of the lovely things is that we now run the Australian side of it, rather than the Australians running us, which is just great. And so, yeah, we ended up here with these assets in New Zealand, and lo and behold, there was a discovery at Maari. Now, you'd seen one of the pictures earlier. I think I've got another one in a minute, where we have 69% stake, and the other parties are Todd Energy, Q and Horizon. But if you're interested in all of that, you can easily find that all out on the New Zealand Petroleum Minerals website. But anyway, 26% stake in the Pohokura gas field, which is just round to the north of New Plymouth. In fact, you may on your tour today see the onshore part of the Pohokura production station. The big red patch in there is the Maui field, okay, the field that's been in production here since about 1979, I think, and has provided New Zealand with a basically uninterrupted supply of gas for 35 years. Maari is the green bit in the centre, that's us, and the drilling activities are taking place in the two big yellow permit areas over about the next 18 months. I've had a couple of, as I say, consultation has taken up a huge amount of time, but I think it's a good thing. I don't think anyone would disagree about that. And I think it should be self-evident that companies like OMV, we don't just arrive and then disappear. You've obviously seen, we've all seen that some companies have turned up and gone again quite quickly. We have production here. To put it in context, I think a good context illustration for you might be that the largest oil producing companies in the world are Exxon and Petrobras. They produce about 1 million barrels of oil equivalent a day each. So OMV, in that big mid-tier scheme of companies internationally, produces about 300,000. OMV in New Zealand, barrels of oil equivalent, that's gas, condensate, the full range of carbon molecule, hydrocarbon product, is a roughly 20,000 barrels a day, so about 6 or 7% of OMV Group production daily. So we're not an insignificant part of OMV Group, but in the scheme of things, you can see where New Zealand sort of fits. Another interesting point, I think, is that in 2012, oil export was New Zealand's 4th largest export revenue earner. So it's not an insignificant industry here. Social license to operate, and we talk about legal license to operate, absolutely critical, and increasingly, for obvious reasons, social license to operate is a concept that people are buying into quite rightly. A drilling campaign, I'm going to have to speed up, aren't I? The drilling campaign, yes. Too much to say, I'm afraid.
That's okay.
That's the ENSCO 107 over the Maari wellhead platform, and that's taken in 2008. ENSCO 107 came here and drilled all the Maari production wells in 2008, and then went away again. Same rig's coming back here in February for us to do exactly that again, and drill the next range of production wells at Maari. And the big tower you can see there is the drilling derrick, and it pivots out over the fixed yellow platform, which is permanently moored, and all the wells are drilled through the yellow platform on the same footprint with no change in impact in terms of the existing operation. But I'm not going to talk about that. I'll talk about Kantan, because that's the rig that's already here. And it's as noted, it's a semi-submersible drilling rig, and it arrived and it was towed to site from Singapore. It took about 21 days to get here. Having spent about 3 or 4 weeks in Singapore, 2 weeks of which was spent biofoul cleaning. So it cost about $2 million to clean the thing, which is infinitesimal in the scheme of spending right now a little north of about $400,000 a day at the moment on that operation going on right now. So when we have ENSCO here, we'll be spending not too far shy with support vessels, probably around $800,000 a day. So it's quite a serious business, and that's why regulation, effective regulation, is pretty important. So the campaign preparation, this started really way back in 2011. The general point I would make about this is that we're a long way from anywhere, right? You don't have commercial negotiating strength when you're trying to get a drilling rig to New Zealand. So the public debate around whether or not you want to explore for oil or gas is an important one, because if you decide that you do, you have to endorse that and you have to give a mandate generally for people to get on and do it. Because it's very high cost business, and it's not like you can go out to tender. You know, OMV's corporate policy on all things is to try and go to tender. This couldn't happen because you couldn't get anyone to come down here for less than 3 months with a rig that was acceptable. You know, you might get a heap of junk from West Africa, but you'd never bring it in as the operator, right? So it's an important factor that we are highly incentivized to bring the right pieces of kit down here. So basically, we went through the whole period from the end of 2011, identifying appropriate rigs, and finally in December last year executed the contract for Kantan IV. At the same time, we brought on all the support vessels and drilling services teams and everybody else. And it's obviously a protracted and interesting exercise. Just need a glass of water, sorry. One of the main areas of our activity has been working with EPA. That's because the environmental impact assessment was in its infancy, I guess, at that stage, and it took quite a long time to get together. And it's better. And essentially, you know, it covers a vast range of activity. The EIA is available on the EPA's website. I think ours was the first one. We had actually, as OMV, done this before. It's a normal thing for us, but it is now more detailed, more comprehensive. And, you know, it now is accepted under the transitional arrangements as being satisfactory to the purposes of a marine consent application, should we need to make one. So it was formally submitted finally on the 30th of June this year, and we got, the Act, as you'll know, came into force, I think it was the 30th, wasn't it, Rob? Sorry, the 28th. And a couple of days later, after I hounded Sarah Gardner on the phone, where's my letter? She provided, you know, we got confirmation that the EIA had been accepted. And that was really important because, of course, we'd already contracted the rig, of course. So this was the whole problem with the process, was that we'd contracted a rig, and you can't just ring up and say, oh, we don't want it. You're on the hook for a commitment of 170 days at the day rate. Okay, you don't just walk away. And you've contracted the vessels, the support vessels at, I don't know, $30,000, $40,000 a day each. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is, you know, we fully buy into environmental compliance, not because we particularly think it's green and a nice thing to do, but it's essential to our business. And it is a bloody expensive business to undertake, and it's got risk. So you need regulatory certainty. Okay, so that's where the rubber really meets the road. Maritime New Zealand, on the Marine Protection Rule, Part 200, discharge and dumping, it's been covered. It's going to be moving to Rob to EPA, and I think it's probably a good thing. Yeah, one of the elements that is challenging at the moment is cuttings. I won't go into detail, but essentially you could have water-based cuttings or synthetic-based cuttings. In the past, you know, water-based cuttings you can dispose of. Synthetic-based cuttings, in the past, the 2008 campaign, we'd bring that ashore to land farms. We'd containerise the whole lot and ship it back to Taranaki and land farm it. I can't say too much more about that at the moment because I'm aware there are some issues with land farming. It's going to be something that, for the ENSCO campaign, we're going to have to resolve. But at the moment, for the Kantan campaign, it works all right. But it is an area that needs to be worked on. How, 5 minutes?
15 minutes, yeah. 5
to go. Excellent. I'll do that too. So, I mean, the discharge management plan was prepared in December 2012, submitted in May 13, and we would have liked that sooner, but in actual fact, I can tell you why it was slowed up is because we were having to resolve some issues with Maritime New Zealand, quite reasonably raised about insurance, and everyone's very keen on that subject, because insurance is obviously a critical element of oil spill response. And so companies of our scale want to ensure we have all those things ticked. And I find it interesting, you get the subtext in the commentary that all these guys will want to get away with anything. But of course, we can't be in breach of a regulatory requirement because we invalidate our cover. So why would we do that? Of course we wouldn't do that because we have cover on, for example, on our FPSO with a Guard P&I club in London for a hell of a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars. So why would we invalidate our cover by not meeting a regulatory compliance requirement? It's absolute nonsense. So, that sort of thing can be a bit annoying when people suggest that companies like us are not going to be compliant or not exceed compliance, because a suggestion of negligence, for example, or willful misconduct would completely invalidate any cover you had. Other things, biosecurity has been covered. I did hear anecdotally that it was the cleanest rig anyone had ever seen when it came into New Zealand, which I think is great. Obviously, we needed a resource consent for the offloading in Admiralty Bay. And I think we're all aware there have been, security issues and no-go zones and all the rest of it arising out of the unfortunate events off East Cape. But it is what it is. I'd make a comment about people in terms of protesting. Everyone, of course, has a right to protest, goes without saying. For us, where the rubber meets the road is entirely health and safety. If someone's going to go and chain themselves to our rig, we're probably going to want to try and remove them because it's a stupid thing to do. Okay, so we're not going to endanger the operation or the people out there. So sure, go and protest, not a problem at all. But if you interfere with what's going on, that's not acceptable, and we won't tolerate that. And nor should we be expected to. And of course, there's the usual stakeholder liaisons that go on. Very strong relationships with iwi and Taranaki and Hawera for our offshore activities.
Petra, can you use the microphone?
Oh, sorry. We've said a bit already about the health and safety and employment regulations, particularly around safety case. Every rig that comes in has to have a safety case. I won't go through all of that, but you can imagine it's comprehensive. The rig owner and the permit operator has to persuade or ensure that the regulator's happy with the state of the rig and all its equipment and that it's fully compliant. And worth mentioning, although I've probably alluded to it, this is not without substantial oversight from, in our case, our head office in Vienna. When you think that we obtained the permits 4 or 5 years ago for the first exploration well in Matuku, probably about 4 years ago now, and you go through seismic campaign at substantial investment, and you review all that, and you've then got to make a commitment to drill an exploration well. This has a significant cost for the company, and so you get a very, very high degree of oversight from your head office. And interestingly, another thing that we developed internally, which when I joined OMV, we hadn't really got to the point of really thinking about this, but it was quite apparent that we needed a very robust New Zealand-based legal compliance system, and we introduced that with a law firm in Wellington. And so we have a very robust pre-drilling legal compliance regime. So the drilling manager in our organisation, for example, it's a web-based, hundreds of questions covering all the legislation that applies to these activities. And if that isn't signed off and approved, then nothing's going to happen. So that's worked really well, actually. Been a really good system to introduce. I wanted to say a couple of words about the blocks offer in the context of competitive tension. Blocks offer and the Crown Minerals Act regime, of course, encourages participants to come into New Zealand, and the Crown wants you to develop as quickly as possible so that you find oil and gas and you pay tax and royalty to the Crown. The average return to the Crown tax and royalty on a barrel is about 42%. There aren't many companies in New Zealand that pay 42% tax. Okay? So the take for the Crown is quite reasonable in the context of being a long way away. And it has a tension because that competes against the regulatory tension of getting these things approved. So on the one hand, you're under pressure to complete a program. On the other hand, you've got to get everything approved to do it. And I think at the moment, I've made a comment at the bottom, this challenge to coordinate early commitments and the consenting process. We've had the luxury of being in the transition period to the middle of next year. I think as Rob's alluded to,
19 minutes.
Once they have to do their first real consents, and you're not a company that's drilling an offshore well under Section 166 of the Act, which is the transition section, then that will really, that tension between getting all your commercial activities lined up, meeting your permit commitments and the consenting regime is going to start to make life quite challenging. So very quickly, some high-level comments. I've mentioned transition. I think it's important. There's been a huge learning curve in minding this gap for everybody. I would endorse the comments about resourcing and expertise. We're in the fortunate position of being able to attract that. It's harder in government, but it needs to be done. And I think the flip side of regulators being more demanding is that regulators need to be prepared to make decisions. Just accepting a document, which happens under some regimes at the moment, and not approving it or not saying yes, it's complete, or that it's effective, or we say yes, you've met your requirements, that's not good enough. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can make regulatory demand, but when those things are met, someone has to say, yes, you've ticked the box. Because otherwise, you end up in the situation where when something goes wrong, it's too easy for the regulators to say, oh, there was a gap. No, we didn't mean that. We accepted your document, but we never approved it. Acceptance and approval are key issues, and it really does need to be addressed going forward. I'm not sure that it will be, but it needs to be. I think I've probably covered all that. So some pictures to finish. I thought there was great pictures. I wanted to try and get you an idea of scale. So this is the Kantan IV arriving in the middle of August at the top of Admiralty Bay in the mist. I'll just take 2 more minutes, Jim. And as you can tell, it's enormous.
1, Patrick.
Sorry?
1 minute, Patrick.
1.5. So I always get what I want.
10, Patrick.
And this is it arriving. Now, what I wanted to point out to you was that you could see on the previous slide, can I go back? The previous slide, the scale of it. You know, you can see the bridge of the ship, there's someone standing on the bridge, and you can see the red bow of the ship with the structure on the back. So you just note the red bow. That's the red bow on the right, submerged. So what happens is the support vessel completely submerges itself in the water. Okay? The whole thing. You can just see the red in behind the rig. That's the stern. Okay? So the whole thing sinks. Okay? And then the other support vessels tow it off, and then the ship deballasts and comes up out of the water and sails back to Singapore. Okay, so that's how that happens. So have you ever wondered how a rig gets off an HLV? It's like a submarine. No, I've got 2 seconds more. And that's it on its way to the first drill site with the support vessels towing the rig out. So I hope it's given you a bit of a flavour for what's actually going on there right now, and the commitment made and the tension between regulatory requirements and commercial competitiveness. Thanks.
Patrick, thank you very much indeed.